The phone buzzed during the 21-gun salute. I let it ring. My name is Ethan Reese, 37, cybersecurity auditor. Rain hit the casket like code on a screen, steady, systematic, predictable. I stood alone at Arlington's outer section, watching them fold the flag with military precision. My father would have appreciated the symmetry. The honor guard handed me the triangle. The fabric felt heavier than it should have. My phone buzzed again. I waited until the last uniform disappeared into the mist. Then I checked the notification. The termination of employment, from Craig Drummond, Senior Director of Operations. Personal tragedies can't interrupt operations. Effective immediately, return equipment by end of business Monday. HR will process final documentation. I read it twice, word for word. The rain kept falling. I typed one word back. Understood. Then I put my phone away. The graveyard felt smaller now. You know what the strangest part was? I wasn't surprised. Craig had been moving me away from high-clearance projects for weeks. Ever since I'd flagged that redacted file discrepancy. Something about vendor verification protocols that didn't match the audit trail. He'd called it administrative oversight. I'd called it sloppy. Maybe I should have seen this coming, but standing next to my father's grave getting fired via email, that was a level of calculation I hadn't anticipated. The ride back to my car felt longer than usual. I placed the folded flag in my trunk next to my laptop bag and the box of files I'd been meaning to organize. Everything fit perfectly, like a puzzle with pieces too sharp to ignore. The parking lot was empty except for groundskeepers. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, engine running, watching the windshield wipers clear the view. Craig Drummond thought personal tragedies couldn't interrupt operations. He was about to learn otherwise. I drove home to an empty house. No messages on the machine. No flowers by the door. My father had been a quiet man who kept to himself, just like me. That night, I deleted every contact from my work phone. Craig, Karen from HR, the whole cybersecurity team, even Janet from accounting who always remembered my birthday. 47 names gone. I didn't feel angry. Anger was inefficient. I felt something else. Something colder. I opened my personal laptop and started reviewing files I'd backed up months ago. Audit logs, IP traffic, access credentials that hadn't been reversed. Craig had made a mistake. He'd fired me, but he'd forgotten to kill my system access. Most companies have a 48-hour delay on credential depletion, lock title to avoid accidental lockouts. Craig was always big on following protocol. I had 2 days to work with Ghost Access. 2 days to dig into those administrative oversights he'd mentioned. The first thing I found was interesting. The second was troubling. The third changed everything. By midnight, I'd traced funding discrepancies that went back 6 months. Shell companies. Dummy contracts. Money flowing through security protocols that shouldn't exist. Craig Drummond wasn't just bad at his job, he was stealing from the government. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Rain was still falling outside, tapping against my window like fingers on a keyboard. Personal tragedies can't interrupt operations. Maybe not. But operations could definitely be. I thought about my father. 30 years of military service. Never took a dime that wasn't his. Never cut a corner that compromised the mission. He would have done the same thing I was about to do. I opened a new encrypted folder and started copying files. The hunt had begun. I found out the truth. My mother's house smelt like lavender and old coffee. I'd been staying in my childhood bedroom for 3 weeks, surrounded by boxes of my father's files and my own digital investigation. She didn't ask questions. Just made extra breakfast and left it on the counter. Smart woman. I deleted my work contacts permanently, blocked the company email, changed my phone number. If Craig Drummond wanted to reach me about returning equipment, he could send a lawyer. The isolation felt natural, like putting on old clothes. My investigation had expanded beyond those initial files. I'd pulled every audit log from the past 18 months, every IP trace, every access record I could scrape before my credentials expired. Patterns emerged, money flows that didn't make sense, security protocols that shouldn't exist. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My father's closet. While helping Mom sort through his belongings, I found a secure drive wedged behind his military commendations. The same drive he'd asked me about 2 years ago. Something about checking if it still worked. I'd assumed it was family photos. It wasn't. The drive contained financial documents from 2018, Defense Department subcontract records, budget allocations flagged during congressional hearings, Project Cerberus, Project Nightfall, Project Blackwater. I cross-referenced the names with my current audit logs. Every single project had counterparts in Craig's security protocols. The government contracts from 2018 had been shut down for fraud. But the money? The money had been rerouted through private contractors, through shell companies, through my workplace. Craig hadn't just stolen from one source. He'd been systematically draining federal funds for years. My father had been investigating the same pattern when he retired. He'd known all along. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Rain streaked the windows of my childhood bedroom, same as it had at the funeral. But this felt different, like pieces of a larger machine clicking into place. There was only one person I trusted with this information, Lydia Chen. We'd worked together at 3 different contractors over the past decade. She'd left 6 months ago for the DOJ cybercrime unit, said she was tired of watching corporate executives play fast and loose with federal regulations. She was also the only person who'd congratulated me after my 2022 whistleblower presentation. Everyone else had avoided eye contact for weeks. I sent her a single encrypted message. "Coffee?" She replied within 20 minutes. "Usual place. Tuesday." The usual place was a diner in McLean where government types went to pretend they weren't discussing classified information. Lydia looked the same. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, coffee already cold by the time I arrived. "You look like hell," she said. "I feel worse." She didn't mention my father, didn't ask about the firing, just waited. I slid a flash drive across the table. Hypothetical question. If someone found evidence of systematic federal fund siphoning through private contractors, what would be the best way to report it? Hypothetically. She pocketed the drive without looking at it. Depends on the scope. If it's just financial fraud, FBI cybercrime. If it involves defense contracts, Inspector General. If it's both, then you'd want someone with jurisdiction across multiple agencies. Someone who specializes in procurement fraud. Section to coffee. And if this person wanted to remain anonymous, or whistleblower protections. But they're not bulletproof. She leaned forward. "Ethan, how deep are we talking?" I told her about Craig, about the shell projects, about the money flows that couldn't be explained through normal auditing. I didn't mention my father's drive, not yet. "Jesus," she set down her cup. "This is bigger than one asshole boss. I know. How much bigger?" I opened my laptop and showed her the analysis I'd spent 3 weeks building. Shell companies that existed only on paper. Security protocols that masked financial transfers. Vendor records that had been falsified going back years. 6.2 million. That's what I can prove so far. Lydia's face went pale. "So far? I think there's more. Much more." She stood up. "I need to make some calls. Lydia stays between us until I verify the patterns match what we're already investigating. But Ethan," she picked up her jacket, "if you're right about this, Craig Drummond isn't just stealing from the government." "What do you mean?" "He's part of something larger." She walked away, leaving me with the check and a dozen new questions. That night I went just similar to Craig's shell projects. They were identical. Down to the routing numbers. Down to the vendor classifications. Down to the security protocols that shouldn't exist. My father hadn't just suspected fraud. He'd been tracking the same operation for years. But someone had shut him up, forced him into retirement, made him disappear into obscurity. Someone who knew he was getting close. I thought about Craig's email at the funeral, the timing, the calculation. Personal tragedies can't interrupt operations. Maybe this wasn't about me at all. Maybe I'd just inherited the wrong investigation. I pulled up Craig's employee history. Senior Director of Operations since 2019. Before that, Financial Oversight Manager. Before that, a gap in the records. A gap right around the time my father was forced to retire. Everything connected. Every thread led back to the same source. Craig Drummond hadn't just fired me for flagging a discrepancy. He'd fired me for being my father's son. The rain stopped. For the first time in weeks, I could see stars through my bedroom window. I had everything I needed to destroy Craig's operation. The question was whether I could do it before he realized what I'd inherited. The trap was simple, elegant. My father would have approved. 2 days after meeting Lydia, I compiled everything into a single package. audit logs, financial discrepancies, shell company records, cross-referenced project names that connected private fraud to defense contract violations. I even included Craig's access credentials, the ones he'd forgotten to revoke when he fired me via email. Sloppy. The Inspector General's office received an anonymous tip that Thursday morning. Encrypted communication, untraceable IP address, professional packaging that couldn't be ignored. I signed it simply, a concerned auditor. By Friday afternoon, Lydia confirmed what I'd suspected. "Your patterns match exactly with Operation Downstream," she said over secure chat. "We've been tracking federal procurement fraud for 8 months. Your data just accelerated our timeline by years. How long before they move? Weeks, maybe days. IG is coordinating with FII financial crimes. Craig Drummond just became priority 1. Perfect. But I wasn't done. You know what the most satisfying part about precision warfare is? Watching your opponent panic while you stay perfectly calm. I'd kept one access backdoor Craig didn't know about. A compliance monitoring system that logged all internal communications, emails, memos, meeting transcripts, every word. I created a fake identity, David Morrison, Senior Compliance Officer, complete with fabricated credentials and a requesting audit authorization from headquarters. Then I sent Craig a simple request. Quarterly security audit required. Please provide all vendor verification records and project authorization logs by Monday. He responded within 30 minutes. Authorized by whom? I need approval chain documentation. I sent back corporate letterhead I'd forged in 20 minutes. Authorization attached. Time sensitive. Board level priority. Hook, line, sinker. Craig began making phone calls immediately. I knew because I was monitoring his email traffic in real time, watching him scramble, watching him reach out to department heads, trying to verify an audit that didn't exist. But here's the beautiful part. The more he tried to verify, the more suspicious it looked to the people who were already investigating him. Internal reshuffles started Monday morning. Contractors were being re-verified without explanation. Security clearances were under review. People were getting moved off projects with no justification. Craig was making every mistake possible. But then something unexpected happened. I was reviewing intercepted emails when I saw a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Communications between Craig and someone named Malloy, financial authorizations, vendor confirmations, signature approvals going back 6 years. Serena Malloy, the company CFO. I pulled her employment records, cross-referenced her access logs, analyzed her signature patterns on financial documents. Craig hadn't been working alone. Serena had been falsifying vendor records since 2018, creating shell companies, authorizing fraudulent payments, managing the entire financial architecture of the operation. Craig was just the front man. The operation was bigger than I'd imagined, better organized, more systematic. They'd been siphoning federal funds through multiple channels, multiple contractors, multiple fake companies. My father had been closer to exposing them than I'd realized. No wonder they'd forced him out. I spent the next 48 hours building a comprehensive dossier on both Craig and Serena. Financial records, communication patterns, shell company linkages, government contract violations, everything. But government investigations move slowly. Bureaucracy, paperwork, due process. I needed something faster. I needed public exposure. That's when I remembered Maria Santos, CNN's cybersecurity correspondent. She'd broken the Pentagon contractor scandal last year. Sharp, fearless, always looking for her next big story. She also maintained an encrypted typeline for whistleblowers. Perfect. I created a new identity, more sophisticated this time. Complete digital backstory, encrypted everything. I chose the name Thanatos. Friday night I compiled the final package. Everything I'd gathered, everything Lydia had confirmed, everything that proved systematic federal procurement fraud involving millions of dollars. I added video files I'd recovered from security systems, video recordings of Craig and Serena discussing Project Real Actions, email chains spanning 6 years. Incontrovertible evidence. I typed a single message. Federal contractor committing systematic fraud. Multiple defense contracts compromised. Active investigation ongoing. Documents attached 5/5. More coming Monday. Saturday morning I drove to my father's grave. The rain had stopped. Everything felt cleaner, sharper. I placed a small stone on his headstone. An old military tradition, a sign that someone had visited, that someone remembered. I thought about the coordinates I'd found in his files, the latitude and longitude of every shell company address, the GPS locations of every fraudulent transaction. He'd mapped the entire operations, just like I had. Personal tragedies can't interrupt operations, Craig had said, but operations could definitely be interrupted by personal justice. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, watching the cemetery groundskeepers work. Everything moved with purpose, precision, order, just like revenge should. My phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number. Received your package, this bigger than I expected. Monday morning. Be ready. Maria Santos. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Monday morning, Craig Drummond's logo would be on CNN, and I would disappear back into the quiet, where I belonged. Monday morning changed everything. I was staying at a lakeside cabin in West Virginia, 40 miles from civilization, no cell towers, no neighbors, just me, a laptop and satellite internet. Perfect place to watch Rome burn. At 6:47 a.m., Maria Santos went live. Federal tech contractor accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. Whistleblower remains anonymous. The headline crawled across the bottom of the screen like digital wildfire. Maria stood outside my former workplace, microphone in hand, looking like a prosecutor reading a verdict. A comprehensive investigation revealed systematic theft of federal defense funds through the Virginia-based contractor Dynex Security Solutions. Anonymous sources provided evidence of shell companies, falsified vendor records, and fraudulent billing schemes totaling over $10 million. $10 million. More than I'd initially calculated. Maria had done her homework. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. The story rolled for 7 minutes. Financial charts, document screenshots, everything you could define the way of the system's appendage in. But the best part? They'd caught Craig on camera. He appeared at 6:54 a.m., walking from his BMW to the office entrance. Maria approached with her camera crew, microphone extended like a weapon. Mr. Drummond, can you comment on allegations of systematic fraud within your organization? Craig looked like a deer in headlights. His usual commanding presence had evaporated. He mumbled something about pending investigations and no comment. The camera zoomed in on his face, sweat beading on his forehead, eyes darting left and right looking for escape routes. He looked guilty as hell. By 8:30, the story had exploded across every major news outlet. By 9:15, federal agents were at the Virginia headquarters. I watched the live feed from 3 different news channels: DOJ vehicles, FBI vans, SEC investigators with boxes and computers, employees streaming out of the building, looking confused and unemployed. Yellow crime scene tape across the entrance. The company logo, the same logo I'd seen on my paychecks for 5 years, being covered with federal seizure notices. Beautiful. Craig appeared on camera twice more. Once being escorted to a federal building in handcuffs. Once outside his Arlington home, refusing to comment while reporters shouted questions. His image became the face of corporate corruption. The news networks looped the footage all day. Craig Drummond, sweating and stammering. Craig Drummond, trying to look innocent, while evidence mounted around him. By afternoon, they'd arrested Serena Malloy, too. She lasted about 4 hours before cutting a deal with prosecutors. Smart woman. She probably knew this day would come eventually. The SEC announced a parallel investigation. Congressional hearings were being scheduled. Department of Defense launched an internal audit of all contractor relationships, dominoes falling in perfect sequence. I turned the volume down and just watched. No sound, just the silent choreography of justice being served. My phone buzzed once around sunset. Text from unknown number. Single emoji. Lydia. I smiled and put the phone away. The cabin felt peaceful. Lake water lapped against the shore. Birds called to each other across the water. Wind moved through pine trees with mathematical precision. This was how things should be. Quiet, ordered, balanced. I thought about my father, about the files he'd left behind, about the investigation he couldn't finish. He would have enjoyed this moment. Not the destruction, not the revenge, just the precision, the systematic unraveling of corruption, the patient execution of justice over years of careful planning. Craig Drummond had thought personal tragedies couldn't interrupt operations. He was wrong about that. But he was right about one thing. Operations could be interrupted, just not the way he'd expected. I opened my laptop and deleted every encrypted file, every backup, every digital trace of my involvement. Thanates disappeared into the electronic ether. The story would continue without me. Congressional investigations, trials, asset seizures. Maybe Craig would spend the next decade in federal prison. Maybe Serena would flip on other contractors. None of it mattered to me anymore. I'd done what I came to do. The lake reflected the last light of day like a mirror. Everything was still, perfect, complete. I closed the laptop and went outside. Somewhere in Virginia, Craig Drummond was probably trying to sleep in a federal holding cell, wondering where it all went wrong. Wondering who had destroyed his carefully constructed empire. He'd never know it was me. And I'd never need to tell him. Some victories are best enjoyed in silence. I sat on the dock until the stars came out. Clear sky. No city lights. No distractions. Just quiet satisfaction and the sound of water moving against the shore. Tomorrow I'd start thinking about what came next. Tonight I'd just sit with what had been finished. Justice didn't need applause. Just needed to be done right. 6 months later, I was living in a converted fire tower. Upstate New York. 30 acres of forest. No neighbors within 5 miles. I restored vintage radios for collectors. Part-time work. Enough to pay bills. Enough to stay invisible. The tower had been abandoned since 1987. I'd bought it for cash, restored the electronics, installed solar panels. Everything I needed fit in 4 small rooms stacked on top of each other. Perfect. I worked with my hands now. Circuit boards, tube resistors, components that could be cleaned, fixed, made functional again. Everything had a purpose. Everything had its place. I spoke to almost no one. The hardware store clerk in town knew me as the radio guy. The postal worker left packages at the base of the tower. The propane delivery driver honked twice when he filled the tank. That was enough human contact. Most evenings I sat on the observation deck and listened to shortwave broadcasts. Ham radio operators talking to each other across continents. Voices in the static, connected by invisible signals. I thought about Craig sometimes. The trial had lasted 3 months. Federal fraud charges, conspiracy, money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Serena got 8 years after her cooperation agreement. The company was dissolved, assets seized. A dozen other defense contractors were under investigation. My father's work had finally been finished. But I felt no bitterness, no satisfaction, no need to gloat or explain. Just precise execution of a necessary task. You know what I learned? Revenge doesn't require anger, it just requires patience and systems thinking. Understanding how things connect, how pressure applied at one point creates failure at another, how small actions compound into inevitable consequences. Craig had made the mistake of thinking personal tragedies couldn't interrupt operations. He'd been wrong about the nature of operations, and wrong about the nature of personal tragedies. I'd never spoken to anyone about what I'd done. Never would. Some stories were meant to be kept in silence. The radio work suited me. Old Zenith table models, Philco cathedrals from the 1930s, Halografters shortwave sets. Each one a puzzle with definite solutions. Unlike people, they were predictable. Every spring I drove south to Virginia, about 6 hours from the tower. Always the same route, always the same destination. Arlington Cemetery. My father's grave looked the same. The headstone, the small military marker, the precise rows that extended in both directions. But this year I brought something new. A small bronze plaque, 3 inches by 2 inches. Plain lettering, no explanation. I placed it at the base of the headstone. It read simply, 38.8794 degrees north, 77.0672 degrees west, 43.7102 degrees north, 74.0159 degrees west. 2 sets of coordinates. The first, the exact location of Craig Drummond's office where he'd sent that email. The second, The latitude and longitude of my fire tower. Latitude of exposure. Longitude of peace. I sat by the grave for 20 minutes. Not thinking. Not remembering. Just being present. When I left, I didn't look back. The drive home felt shorter than usual. Spring was coming early this year. Trees were budding, first flowers pushing through winter soil. Back at the tower, I had work waiting. A 1941 Zenith transoceanic that needed complete restoration. New capacitors, clean tube sockets, precision alignment of the RF stages. I climbed the stairs to my workshop, put on my reading glasses, connected the signal generator. Outside, wind moved through pine trees with mathematical precision. Inside, I worked on making old things function again, quietly, methodically, perfectly. The way my father had taught me, the way I'd always done things, the way I always would.